This episode of Pixel Sift is proudly supported by Murdoch University School of Arts with courses in game, sound, radio, screen, communications and journalism. There's an extensive range of top quality fields to propel yourself into a future career, and you can mix and match. If you want to do a little bit of here and a little bit of that, mix them all together in some sort of crazy educational soup of some variety.
This is what you think that this show is.
It's an educational soup, that's right. It's never too late to get involved and improve your skill set. You can search for Murdoch University for more information to start down the road of knowledge. Murdoch University School of Arts proudly supporting Pixel Sift.
Pixel Sift.
Hello and welcome to Pixel Sift. This week, as most weeks, I'm joined by my co-hosts Mitch and Scott. My name, of course, being Gianni, and our guest tonight is Christy Dena, who's joining us from the eastern coast, from another part of Australia. Christy, thanks for joining us today, and we're going to be talking all about the online event that you've organised, which is now available for people to watch online and learn from crafting intangibles.
Yes, it's great to be here. Hello, Gianni, Mitch, and Scott.
Hello.
Thanks for having me.
Hey.
And we're going to be learning all about that, but we're also going to be learning out some other stuff and some topics that we are coming back to that we ran out of time for last week, aren't we, Mitch?
Yes, we'll be looking at a topic that we didn't quite cover. Are retro remakes taking away incentive from developers to develop new game IPs?
Or is it making the sales of it to publishers more difficult?
Yeah.
Yes, and lastly, we'll be looking into whether indie games are being underpriced.
It's a good question. We've got some data there, I'm sure.
A few.
Let's jump into it, shall we?
Pixel Sift. Pixel Sift. No, seriously, Pixel Sift. No, seriously.
Pixel Sift.
So there are just so many re-releases and remasters just out. Crash Bandicoot N, Sane Trilogy, Call of Duty, Modern Warfare Remastered, StarCraft recently got the treatment. So with the commercial success of all these games, is there now a lack of incentive for publishers to take a gamble on new IPs?
So Crash Bandicoot was at the top of the Australian charts for a number of weeks.
The global charts.
Global charts.
Even. It's just taken the world by storm.
Modern Warfare Remastered was originally sort of an add-on, a pre-order bonus for people who bought the most recent new game in the series. But then as it was sort of released on its own,
Also, while the proper release kind of flopped.
Yeah, so it kind of outstripped that and became more popular.
I think I'm the
StarCraft,
only person that has Infinite Warfare without the Modern Warfare remake.
You're probably about the only
And it's
person.
sitting there in my achievements list looking at it just like, oh, there it is.
Well, somebody had to buy it, so
Yeah.
as long as you're doing
Good
your
on
bit,
you,
Jane, Mitch. And also, of course, StarCraft, which has been obviously very popular over its entire lifespan, but now has received a remake, a re-update, shining at the edges of the game there. One of the things we wanted to talk about is kind of the talking about building into existing IPs and structures, and Christy would love to pull on your experience here to talk about building into worlds that already exist and some of the challenges of writing for those, and also like if you think that this is something that's going to disincentivize companies to take a risk on new ideas.
I mean, when you look at it from a business point of view, from a purely economics point of view, it does make sense to remaster, whether it's games, movies. But you have to remember that there is a cost involved. So obviously it's not a quick and easy free thing. There's cost involved and there's time involved. So you have to decide whether the investment is worth it, and that's partly looking at how much time has gone by and sort of reading the cultural landscape, if you like, to see what's happening. And of course just with franchises, the whole philosophy of franchises is that you are working off something that audiences, and players already know. And that's all based on the idea of the mere exposure effect, which is a principle that the more you're exposed to something, the more you like it. And so audiences, players and everyone, it's just like, oh, we've got people that that like it just because of exposure, but also because of personal experience with it. And that's the reason why we see sequels and also remasters come into that as well. But it's only one source of income. It would be a mistake to think that a company could survive just on remasters. They have to continuously use lots of different things, different sources of income, just like indies need to basically balance their income. And things like remastering and working on franchises help bankroll experimental stuff.
Do you think there's an opportunity there for, as you talk about it, there's people who are looking for new opportunities and trying to find, I guess, the next franchise that they could turn into a big multi-platform, multi-game sort of thing or multimedia sort of thing. Do you think there is an opportunity there for people to take advantage of that? And do you think that's an indie thing, or is this going to be more of the established market players that we're kind of talking more about?
Well, certainly people can have a good bat at it. They can definitely have a go. And, there's lots of discussions about how you do that. And the discussions about, you create characters and settings which could actually be really interesting in lots of different media forms. So, for instance, just like in TV, when you have a TV series, you design it so there's lots of different characters that are continually coming in, or lots of different settings that you're going to make it interesting, and they're more likely to have life over time. Those same sort of principles sort of apply, but sort of happen even further. It's like, could it be something that people want to interact with, or maybe experience in a different mode? Is it something they're willing to watch? Is it something they're interested in reading? And if you think about that from the very beginning, that means that it's quite complex. And you're structuring your world and the principles of your world, your characters and the actions that happen with all of these things in mind. So that's one approach of having a go at that. And I think anyone can possibly do that in terms of the conception side of things. But the thing is, it takes time and it takes awareness and sort of experience of the platforms. And as indies, sometimes you've got time and sometimes you haven't. And that time is usually between other things. So there's, how much can you actually work on it, and how much have indies worked in lots of different platforms and know, how you can create something that will work on different platforms. Those are some of the obstacles I think that are there for indies. But the fact is that someone could put something out, and even if they didn't design it to be multi-platform, if it goes well, if it's popular, then of course they can expand it.
You talked a little bit about kind of, building this world out and taking the ideas of it and thinking about it as sort of a broader thing as you start from that. I was watching one of the talks that Chris Avallone gave at Crafting Intangibles. He's the writer of Fallout and stuff. And one of the big things he talked about, and especially when writing for a franchise and writing for something that's already existing, is he said that you actually need to kind of sometimes hold back on that. You need to kind of think about that, but you also need to think about the context of what that franchise is. And I'm thinking, because for an indie context, there are a lot of games that have been really popular that have kind of drawn upon existing franchises but taken that in a different direction. So the one that pops into my head is Stardew Valley, which draws upon that sort of Harvest Moon style farming game. Farmville did something very similar. Do you think that's a valuable thing for indies to kind of think about, to maybe use the influences of these games that exist, these franchises that exist, and kind of taking and putting their own spin on that style of writing or that style of gameplay?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's more work in that approach. There will always be existing franchises in and out of copyright, that indies or that any tier, any developer can actually work in. There's two different skill sets. It's great if you have both, But yeah, in Transmedia, we call it proactive or retroactive Transmedia. So proactive, you're designing it to be transmedia from the beginning. Retroactive, you're making it transmedia afterwards. And those skill sets, like what Chris was touching on, is about identifying what was it about the previous projects that came out, the previous games, the previous movies, books, whatever, that resonated with people so much. And how much, what are those core principles? What are the things that we can't play with? To ensure that we're not ruining, the experience for the pleasures that people are getting from it. And once you the idea is that once you sort of lock in those, then you can move around by adding new things outside of that.
I think a really good example along exactly what you're saying there is as a new franchise, or a newish franchises anyway, is Overwatch. That's transmedia, as I understand it anyway. Correct me if I am wrong. But, what has made it so popular is the rich backstories that they've given, and all the videos and the extra content that they've created on different forms of media that has made it kind of like the standout franchise of the last few years, at least. Yes,
definitely. All of those animation videos, the comics, everything that they've been playing with there, and it's been character based, which is really interesting because a lot of people talk about worlds. You've got to design a world, and often they're actually, they're talking about the setting and the fact that there's lots of different locations. But a lot of the reason why people are attracted to these sorts of experiences is because of the characters and because of yourself as a player, what you do and how you feel, and your interactions with the characters. So, and what the characters say about you in their journeys and their experiences.
Could remakes and remasters be an opportunity to maybe foster or incubate new talent in the development community?
As in, get people to work on them.
Yeah, as in
as a way to learn.
Yeah.
I can think of a really good example of this. The new game that's just come out, which is an installment in a franchise, long-running, Sonic Mania, which has just come out this week, was originally done by a team that had kind of grown up with the franchise, weren't originally linked, and now it's one of the most highly received Sonic games that's come out. They've drawn on the franchise that people love, and made it a game that fits in well and is a sort of a worthy successor to where that franchise was going. And Sonic was something that's been around for a long time, but I guess for a lot of people would think it probably had been sort of languishing a little bit. But yeah, then goes on to be this really popular game and ticks all the boxes. So, Christy, what do you think about remakes and remasters? How do you personally feel about the idea of that sort of thing happening?
Yeah. Oh, just as certainly developers can learn, through working on these sorts of things. And when you're at the writing and design level, you have to have a whole lot of skills to do that. So I don't think you'd be learning necessarily, although you could as an indie, obviously. But I just want to mention, quickly, when you sort of, it's really easy to frame this idea of doing a whole lot of things across platforms as being something that only big businesses can do. But I'm seeing so many indies, playing with this and doing really interesting stuff. They're not calling it transmedia, of course, and they don't need to. But they're doing really interesting stuff. Now, the name of him has gone out of my head. Perth dev.
Jacob Janerka?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He just sneezed now, and he knows we're talking about him now.
And the stuff that he did with his game, that came out of a genuine, it was quite genuine. It worked within his world, creating all of these weird materials, the cult website, the religious Bible, the dating simulator game and all that sort of stuff. It was all about indie marketing, but it was all diegetic. It was all in fiction, content marketing. And that's just an example of an indie. There was a really cool, what they call it, the indie game science fair. I don't know if you saw that. That was at a few years ago by Polygon. And they basically commissioned a whole lot of indie devs to do a whole lot of creative stuff around their projects, and that's basically all Transmedia, and they're all really, really interesting stuff. So I just wanted to, mention that because it's really easy to sort of think that it's something that only the big guns, the big companies can do. And now I've forgotten your question.
I forgot my question too. It's all good. Yeah.
Look, there's a lot of really interesting stuff that we could talk about with remakes and remasters. I just wanted to sort of see what you felt about it personally as someone who creates a bunch of new things. How do you feel about these remakes and remasters kind of coming up and getting a lot of attention?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's the conversation always comes around, to this is going to spell trouble, and the problem with too many sequels is, as well as remastering and all that sort of stuff. But it won't be the only thing. That's an impossibility. And there is the good side of it is that in terms of audiences, these are projects, these are game worlds, these are games that people want to actually spend time with, and these businesses are putting their money into preservation, which is not happening in lots of different ways. It's making sure that some games that aren't as easily played can now be accessible again, and obviously jazzing them up with contemporary tech and all of that sort of thing. But there's a genuine audience drive there for wanting to do that, and obviously it's based on nostalgia and reliving positive things. But in terms of the point of view of audience access, I see no problem with that. But it's just, we all know the underlying problem is that so many companies are purely thinking about money, which is fine, but they don't realize that culture is actually a part of your economics. Like if they just did what they thought was a safe bet financially, then people would lose interest in gaming in general. There needs to be weird stuff. There needs to be new stuff as well. And as soon as you understand that there's a whole lot of different parts of your game ecology that are bouncing off each other, then you realize it makes good economic sense to actually be playing with a few different things there.
I think this is something you could say of just about anything creative where there is business involved.
Yeah.
Music, you can talk about movies, we've talked about TV shows and all of that sort of stuff. There is always that balance between doing something that's interesting and also something that is, I guess,
pushing boundaries.
Mainstream, that you have a mass market for. Let's jump into our next topic, shall we?
Did you know PixelSift is available on other platforms? You can find previous episodes on iTunes, Pocket Casts, YouTube, and on the PixelSift website.
Now, if you just tuned in, which won't make any sense if you're listening to this as a podcast, but you might be watching us live.
I could have skipped at this point.
It'd be okay to about 17 minutes in.
Just skipped up.
Just skipped up to the point. Our guest today is Christy Dena. Christy is a writer, designer, and director. Universe Creation 101 is her company, and the mastermind, is that fair to say, of crafting intangibles?
Yeah, I guess the imagery was kind of wizardy, witchy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess the
magician,
chief wizard or something.
magical denizen of crafting intangibles.
It looks like you've just, in your picture, you've like made that plaque. You just like conjured it.
That's right.
Yeah.
I did. I had to get it. I actually had to pay to get it made. So.
Same difference.
Awesome.
It's a very slow form of magic, transferring of good. It's a transferal of one material good into another.
Yeah. There were no stars or purpley mist bits or anything like that. Yeah.
Now, for people who haven't heard about the event that you've put on, which is now available for people to take part in online and learn from, what exactly is it, and what were you trying to achieve?
Yeah, so Crafting Intangibles, it was an international online indie conference that was specifically looking at interactive narrative design. And so there was a few goals, one to do with the subject matter of interactive narrative design and the other one in terms of the experiment of the format. So in terms of interactive narrative design, I think for me, I started off, I used to make games as a kid more than play games, and I was writing more for theatre, and I was working in digital effects, and I started working on websites and CD-ROMs in the 1990s. And so writing for me started, I guess, in a linear, passive, non-interactive mode. And then as I started learning more about interactivity and then, more about game design specifically, the thing I noticed was that there's actually a lot of parallels with how, systems thinking and thinking as a game designer and thinking when you're actually designing the architecture of a narrative. And so I found that there's a lot of conversations that happen, and especially in education, teaching new generations of developers, where they sort of say, okay, these two things are completely different. And when you're, when they talk about narrative or story in games, they say, oh, okay, so it's about dialogue and choices, and let's use the hero's journey because that seems to be popular, from film. And it sort of stops there. And obviously, people who are working in the area understand more of it. But yeah, I wanted to push it further than that. So interactive narrative design. Sorry, did you want to say something?
I was going to say, one of the talks that you hosted was with Ellen Urick of Blowfish Studios, friend of the show.
And you were just name dropping this whole episode, aren't you? Look at all these cool people that I know.
There's this really cool online thing called Crafting Intangibles. You should definitely check it out.
There's a really great video section
over the last couple of days. But Ellen was talking about this kind of crossover as well, and talking about how, from her experience as doing theatre, and when we had her on the show, she spoke to this as well, and talking about this overlap between and these compatible fields, and one of the main things she was talking about is that in some of the choices that you are given in a game, they are often given, but the intent can be interpreted differently by the people who are writing the game, and then what it actually comes out. And, they were talking about trying to find parallel systems. Tex Murphy was one of the ones that came up, and you could say a particular thing, but you say it as, in a sarcastic way or in a happy way or an honest way, and having those verbs around what that actually meant when you're actually writing that dialogue. It's a sort of a long-winded way to say that, but what are some of the things you think are super key when people are trying to write or learn about writing for an interactive context versus writing for, say, a stage play?
Well, you see, and this is actually getting to the crux of one of the reasons why I did this, is because I think I know it's really helpful to sort of say what are the differences, but I think what I've seen over the years is that a lot of the conversations go to what are the differences, and people start thinking that they are different, when in actual fact, a lot of the only way that you can really make great stuff is when you're also working in the stuff that overlaps, right? So there's definitely differences. But if you throw out, everything else that has been before, then, then that will cause problems. So for me, it's a case of, okay, we can talk about differences. You need to understand that there is, that a player is a character that you need to design for. So you need to plan for, you need to design for the player journey. But this is already in the best screenwriting as well. They're thinking the whole time about what the audience is thinking and feeling at that point in time. It's called the sequence technique. And so this is where, like, for me, I sort of, fall into the thing of like, yes, there's differences, but when you really get down to the crux of it, when people are doing great stuff in any of them, that's when we all sort of overlap.
Is it fair to say it's more of a difference in execution of the actual same core ideas?
Well, I mean, all of these art forms are influencing each other, not just in terms of, what we experience, like, we can sit down and, watch a movie on Netflix as well as play a game. So we're all influenced by what we're doing. But then as creators, we're being influenced by what creators are doing in different media. And one of the great things about games is, that very much player-centric development cycle. Whereas in other media, it's pretty much you're in the cave, for a really long time, and then maybe focus groups will happen right at the end. But what's great, about designing for games is that you're wanting to get it in front of players as early as possible, and that's a very different way of thinking about the process, and thinking about what privileging what you care about is the effect on people and whether that meaning is actually happening. So yeah, that's something there.
One of the things that we always like to talk about and we find particularly fascinating is the sort of emergent player experiential driven narratives that happen in a game. Do you know of other mediums where people can have that same sort of experience? Is that something that you think is unique to games, or is there something that we could think that, that is the same sort of idea that people can build something out within a structure?
Yeah, so do you mean when players are thinking, experiencing their own personal narrative as they're going through it, or like procedural?
I think more like, say, for example, Minecraft is the one that pops into my head, that you would go and tell the story of what you've done in Minecraft, in the early days at least, and that would be the narrative of what you've done, or something similar where the kind of the framework is there, but you're there to make your own story.
Yeah, where you basically got pieces, and it's up to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's there's tabletop examples, but that's still gaming in there. There's the cut up technique. The early sort of experimental writing techniques where basically they would, instead of giving you a book with a whole lot of words in it, they would jumble up all of the words out of order, sentences out of order, and all that sort of stuff, and you had to combine them yourself to basically create something that actually worked. So there's sort of early experiments of cut-up techniques, and there ones were even earlier than that. So anything where people are, splitting things apart, there's probably parallels there. And I don't want to undermine, what's special and wonderful about games at all. I'm just basically saying that there are, I think, that if you want to make something great, that I've often found talking with creatives across fields who are doing amazing stuff in their area, they've often reached the same epiphanies and insights. That's happened across them.
Was that one of the main sort of ideas behind doing Crafting Intangibles? Is that bringing a bunch of different creatives together and allowing people to learn from their experience and their insights?
Yeah, and to sort of stretch the idea of structures. So we don't privilege the sort of dialogue sort of side of things, which comes later on in your development process. It's more like the really early days where you're thinking, okay, what's going to be the first level, and then the second level and the third level. What is the player going to go through? What do we want them to be thinking and feeling and doing here? What they want to do next? All that sort of stuff. And you're seeing, Jen Genova, he's talking about Journey. In his GDC talk, he talks about the emotion design of Journey and how that actually works. And so we're sort of interrogating those structures and looking at them and say, okay, well, what do these structures look like for interactivity? And what, are there differences? And at the same time, what are different structures that are not about conflict or about a single hero? How do you have multiple people actually being involved and actually doing things which are not about causing harm to other people, but it's still actually interesting And so they're exploring these sorts of topics there.
Yeah, and I think India is the place where these games are kind of thriving. Just again, off the top of my head, while you were talking, I was thinking of experiences I've had in the last 12 months with games. Emily is Away was fantastic, I think, for me.
Yeah.
Firewatch, and everything kind of in that ilk. I mean, even if we're stepping out of India a little bit, Life is Strange is probably another one. Everyone has gone for the Rapture. It's the same ones we kind of pop off because they are special. There's something amazing about that not a lot of other people are doing.
I think you should just jump into itch.io and just kind of click random basically and see what you can find, because there's a lot of really interesting creative stuff there.
Yep.
Yeah, but all of those are, they're like most of those are ex AAA going out there and going, okay, finally, and which is a normal path,
Well, look,
which is a common path. Sorry, I shouldn't say normal. Yeah.
Christy, if people want to find out more about and watch the videos that were put together as part of this thing, how many did you make, and where's the best place for people to go to?
If you type in craftingintangibles.co, that will take you to the site. It's on Medium. There's, good research, Christy. I think there's 15 videos there. There's more coming. There's a couple more coming because we had some live talks over here in Brisbane. But they're all on Vimeo as well. So if you go to the website, they're all embedded on the website, but they're also all on Vimeo there. Freely available for everyone to use.
And all very interesting. I enjoyed watching them. I'm going to go dig through the rest of them and see if I can find any more good gems. Look, that's all we have time for today. Thank you very much for joining us. I just want to say a big thank you to Murdoch University School of Arts, who sponsor this show and help us make it happen. Scott, we've got older episodes, do we not?
Yes, you can find those on facebook.com/pixelsift, twitter.com/pixelsift, twitch.tv/pixelsift, and youtube.com/pixelsiftau. And we are now officially going live on Twitch, YouTube, and now Facebook live channels. So big shout outs if you've been watching in on one of those.
And Mitch, if people want to find out when we're going to be going live, where should they head to?
Yeah, so they can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, and they can find out pretty much we're on everything, Twitter, all that stuff.
Pocket Cast, RSS link on your page, etc., etc.
Everywhere.
All that stuff. And our next episode will be on the 31st.
That's right. Christy, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to be digging into the rest of Crafting Intangibles, and I recommend everyone do the same thing. Great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming along.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
We'll see everyone on the 31st.
Peace out.
See ya.
Bye.